Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Adrienne Stevenson, an Assistant Dean in the Graduate School and Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards. And I have with me today my Graduate Assistant, Honorine Ruler. She's here with me today. I think she's managing the chat and also the waiting room. But we also have our amazing facilitator guest for today, and that is Mike Mitchell. We are always excited to have him with us. He brings a wealth of knowledge, and every year comes to do this presentation, whether it's called the basics of proposal writing or the ins and outs of proposal writing. He brings a wealth of knowledge about applying for grants, $1 million grants. He works with our faculty on putting together their successful proposals for grants, and have worked in other sectors with folks who have put together and submitted very successful grant proposals. So we are always excited to have him come and bring his wealth of knowledge to share with you, the graduate students who are in the stages of identifying and applying for fellowships, scholarships, grants, and awards. So as not to delay the hour, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and Mike will introduce and initiate how he wants this time to go. So Mike is our Strategic Initiative Manager.
That's it.
Okay, titles have changed over time. Mike is the Strategic Initiative Manager for the Office of Research Development. And so that is an office on FSU's campus, and he can tell you all about what it is that they do. His title has changed over time, but the fact that he is amazing, magnificent, and brings this wealth of knowledge has not. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be back again. I think this is the 6th time now. It's definitely an annual thing. And just I have some bad news. Unfortunately, I changed the title of the proposal or the presentation again. I'll make a note not to do that for next time, though.
You can do it as much as you like.
So, whoops, where's my screen share? There we go. As Dr. Stevenson said, my name is Mike Mitchell. I'm the Strategic Initiatives Manager in the Office of Research Development. ORD is part of the Office of the VP for Research, and our job is really to help the university secure funding and resources necessary to conduct research at FSU. So we primarily work with faculty and occasionally some postdocs and staff as well. But I always like to come and talk and give this presentation to the graduate school, because one of the things that we've consistently heard from faculty, new faculty in particular, is that these aren't the kind of skills that they learn in grad school, but they are critical. This is the kind of thing that if you go on to certainly pursue a faculty career, you'll need to know. But also, even if you go into the nonprofit sector, the government sector, industry research in some cases, proposal writing and grant writing is really a critical skill. My own background is not in academia. I worked for the government. I went to the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services after I graduated college. And one of the first things I did was start working on grant proposals for alternative fuel vehicles. Had nothing to do with research, had nothing to do with, the kind of science and arts and humanities work that is done here at Florida State. But the skills are the same. They're transferable across disciplines. There are nuances, however, for each specific area. So that's one of the things I always make a point to say at the beginning of this presentation, is that what I talk about are those broadly applicable skills and tips that are valuable no matter where you are or where you are applying. But there are things that differ based on funding agencies, on sponsors, on disciplines, on just the way things are done. So if you ever hear something from a advisor or certainly from a program officer at one of those sponsors that contradicts what I've said here this afternoon, go with that, because they know better specifically what that sponsor or discipline does. No, we're not going to do this. Mouse it is. I got too fancy with my clicker for no reason for my computer that's sitting a foot away from me. There we go. So there's three phases to this. I always like to break things down into steps to make it more manageable. When we're thinking about funding and being successful in pursuing funding, there's three phases to it. There's capture planning, and then proposal planning, and then proposal development. Most people, when they're new, skip right to that third step, and that is a mistake. Don't do that. You want to put in the time and the effort in the first two areas to set yourself up for success in the proposal development, proposal writing stage. So capture planning is the one that it's usually unfamiliar, but it's really just, it's doing your homework. It's trying to find out what you can about the sponsor, about their goals, about their available resources, and just, learn as much as you can about, well, the customer before you try to make a sale to them. And so it's the process of identifying opportunities, assessing the competitive environment, devising strategies oriented towards winning specific funding opportunities. Well, like I said, what we're trying to do here is understand as much as we can about the people or the organization who has the money that we want, so that we can craft our proposals in the way that lands with them, that resonates with them. And the more time we put into this process, the less chance, I guess, that we waste our own time in putting together a proposal that they're not even interested in. So the first step in this is always finding funding, finding out who has money that we can apply for. And ORD has a lot of resources to help the FSU research community with this process. I think Adrian Agfa has some resources as well. One of them is the same, being Pivot. So there are two links here. I'm going to try to put them in the chat. Maybe I'm sorry, folks. I don't know why my Zoom or my PowerPoint here won't let me copy these links, but they're in the PowerPoint file when they get sent later on. One is a YouTube video that's we recently did a full hour-long training on how to use Pivot to find funding opportunities. That was hosted by Evangeline Coker in ORD. And then we also recently put together a comprehensive training module on our website all about finding funding. So it covers both Pivot and a variety of other resources that are available. This is one of the most important things that I think is in the capture planning process. It's understanding where you are with the sponsor or with the funding agency. And you'll see on the screen here, there's 4 positions: unknown, known, improved, and then favored. And the goal of capture planning is to increase your position, to improve it, to end up at a place where you know that you're going to get that funding before you even apply, or that you at least stand a very good chance of doing so. What you don't want to do is just submit a proposal without ever having contacted the agency or the sponsor ever, and you know nothing about them, they know nothing about you. Your odds of success are much, much lower than if you engage with them, than if you build a reputation, than if you go through this process of identifying who else might be applying and their strengths and weaknesses as compared to your own. The number one thing I can suggest doing in this process is engaging the program officers at foundations, at funding agencies, at whoever the sponsors. Try to find someone there to contact and talk to, and if possible, get to know them, build a relationship with them. They can provide just an absolute wealth of information that you otherwise would not be able to find out. And for the most part, they're very receptive to this. They want to give this money away. That's their job. Doing so helps the sponsor or the funding agency fulfill their mission. And that's really why this funding exists. I think there is a bit of a misperception that we fund research, we fund creative activity we being society, I guess, for the scholar or for the artist. And that's really not the case. We provide that funding to achieve some kind of a goal. Federal agencies have a goal that they want to achieve. They want to better the United States. They want to provide for the health, wealth, defense of the nation, those kinds of things. If it's an art related or humanities related foundation, they may want to provide cultural enrichment. They may want to help a community feel more like a community. But regardless of what the sponsor's goal is, that's why that funding exists. It's not just there for you or for any researcher or artist to apply for. And so the key there is that you have to align your project with what that sponsor wants and really show how your work and your project will help them fulfill their needs. So once you've gone through all that and you understand, what kind of funding opportunities are out there, who else is competing for them, and what the sponsor wants, then you move into the proposal planning stage. The first thing that I would suggest here, always make a checklist. Go through the request for proposals or the solicitation or whatever it is that the sponsor wants to call the document that's guiding their funding competition, and read it and reread it. After you've done that, the thing that I like to do is go through it line by line and do what I call shredding, where you take each of those lines, each requirement, and make it its own line item on a checklist, so that when you go to structure your outline, you can do so and make sure that you have everything that the sponsor wants in that outline. Every time it says the applicant shall or will or must or should even gets its own line. And so I have an example up here on screen of one that I recently did for a team from the College of Education who was working on the NSF Advanced program. And you can see where, the left-hand column there is the section within the proposal, and the middle column is the line from the RFP where it asks for a certain thing, a certain component. And then on the right is where I've made any notes that I thought about as I was going through the RFP. So, for example, let's see, where was the one that I was going to point out? So if you look towards the bottom there is one of the questions that the RFP asks is, what are the team's conclusions based on this preliminary data? That's a requirement from the RFP, but the note there is that this is setting up the proposed interventions. So you can see what this process did for me was not only identify a necessary component from the RFP, it allowed me to think about ways in which I can connect that component to a different area within the proposal, thus building a stronger case. Because all the agency was asking for was some preliminary data. And so you could just go and fulfill the requirement, put some data in there and say, yes, I did this, I checked off this box. Or by going through this process and understanding that much later on you're going to need, and this was a 3-page document, so trust me, it was on a later page, the requirement for interventions, that is. Because you knew it was there, because you read the whole RFP and put together a checklist for it, you can start making connections between sections at a much earlier stage and make a stronger document and a stronger case because of it. The next thing then, I think, is always to make a schedule for yourself. Treat this as if it were a project into itself. Working backwards from when the proposal is due to the sponsor to where you are today. Resist the temptation to schedule through weekends and schedule through holidays. Treat those as off days. First off, you deserve the rest. And secondly, in the very likely scenario that you have to work on one of those weekends, it's your flex time. So you've built in a bit of a buffer for the inevitable contingency that you need to have some extra time. But overall, going through this exercise, I think really is the most important thing you can do to decrease stress and anxiety related to putting together a proposal. of knowing how long you have to write it and what you need to be doing when. And whenever you decrease your stress and decrease your anxiety, you increase the proposal quality. You increase the quality of whatever work you're producing. There are some hard deadlines that you should schedule around. In particular, if you go 3 days back from the sponsored deadline, that's the FSU internal deadline for proposals that are submitted through our sponsored research administration. So if you know that you have to have that 3-day period, or I don't know, Adrian, is there similar requirements for anything you all submit?
Yes, there are.
Okay, so in that case, you have to worry about the 3-day deadline as well. If you have to submit an IRB protocol or something like that ahead of time, and you know that's going to take 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever the case may be, factor that time in as well. And finally, the last thing I can say on this is please be realistic about your estimates. Just because you put on this schedule and say that you can do something in 2 days doesn't necessarily mean that you actually can. And so it's better to overestimate in this process rather than underestimate. The next thing I want to talk about is features, benefits, and themes, and the difference between them and the importance of each of them. So features are things that are unique to you, things that are just part of your work. Like, for example, methodology or research direction or things of that kind, where it's just a fact about what you do. A benefit, though, is the way in which your feature solves a problem that the sponsor cares about. And that is really important because of the gold text there on the right, which I think is probably the most important thing in this entire presentation. People buy, regardless of whether it's a funding agency funding your research or you, a consumer, buying a product at a store. You buy the benefit, not the feature. You buy something to solve a problem that you have. You don't just buy it because of something inherent about whatever the product is. It's the same thing with proposals, with research proposals, with creative proposals. If you don't connect the feature of your work to the benefit to the sponsor through a theme statement, you won't be funded. And that's what proposal themes do for you. They're statements that allow you to show that connection. Now, if you want to get really into it, and you can have a lot of time and probably more resources than a graduate student has, but if you do, and you can identify a feature that you have that no one else has, that's what we would call a discriminator. And then we would want to really, really play that up, because that's that unique feature will make you stand out above other proposals who may be offering the same kinds of thing. So let me give you a couple of examples of theme statements then. And both of these are from recent proposals that I worked on. And you can see the gold text there, that's the feature. And then the garnet text is the benefit. And so how the two of them connect together to make a theme statement. So I don't want to necessarily read text to you, but one of the things that I like about the second one, at least, is that it really lays out, what is this team doing? What's the case they're making? And then closes with a really direct statement of thus enhancing this team's ability to generate transformative research questions. And that was exactly what the request for proposals that proposal was responding to was asking for. The singular goal was to increase the ability of researchers to generate transformative research questions. And we'll get a little more into that later on, but that is writing directly to the requirements of the RFP so that it's easy on the reviewers to find that kind of information. Again, going back to the idea of creating a checklist, you want to create some kind of an outline to help guide your work. it's much easier to do that rather than to sit down with a blank piece of, well, a blank document, I guess, and type out starting at the very beginning. Having an idea of what you want to write ahead of time, again, lets you make those connections between sections that would be much harder to do if you just sat down and started to do it all from the beginning. Now, if an RFP or an agency general guidelines specifies a certain format or outline, you must follow that. Do not deviate from it at all. If they ever tell, well, in it, regardless of what it is, if they tell you to do something, you had better do it, because otherwise you'll be thrown out before they even review your content. But if they don't specify what they want you to do, the first thing I would do is try to find an example of a proposal, a recent proposal to that agency. You can do that a variety of ways. One of the ones I always recommend is going to the sponsor's website and just looking at a list of recent awardees. For the most part, every funding agency or foundation I've ever seen will have some listing of who else has received an award from them. And you can contact those individuals directly and ask them if they'd be willing to share a copy of their proposal. A lot of times they are willing to do so, especially if you contact people who have been awarded not quite recently. So don't go for somebody in the last year or two, go 3 or more years out and you'll have better luck. If all else fails, you can also follow what's called Heilmeyer's Catechism. This is a series of 6 questions that the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency Director, George Heilmeyer, advocated for in his agency. And it's a process of really just specifying what it is that you want to do and why it's important. So these 6 questions, I think, are applicable to any proposal anywhere for anything. You could use this for writing up your research proposal or your proposal for a new vacation that you want to go on. I mean, this is just a way of answering the important questions that someone might have about something that you want to do. Now we're getting to proposal writing. Now, this is the part that I think most people, like I said, skip right to this, and going through those first 2 stages is really important because it makes this easier and better. So the first thing we want to do when we're writing a proposal is bold, italicize, and underline key points throughout. Just looking at this right now, this is a lot of text. If you do nothing else and just glance at this, there's a lot of information here. And if you imagine being a proposal reviewer, having to read 50 of these, 50 proposals, it's overwhelming. It's mentally taxing. It's draining. And you want to make it as easy as you possibly can on that reviewer, both to comprehend your material and remember the benefits from your theme statements. Because if you present them with just a wall of text, their eyes will glaze over and they're going to forget about you and you're not going to get funded. One of the easiest ways to do that is just simply to bold, italicize, and underline key points. What are the things that you want them to remember? Put it in bold. So, for example, here in this may be a bit too small for you to see on your screen, but this is another recent proposal that we submitted, where what we've done is go through and bolded 1 sentence in each paragraph that was the key takeaway from that paragraph. So things like the theme statements in particular. So whenever we were connecting a feature of our proposed work to a benefit that the agency, which was in this case NSF, wanted, that was what got put in bold. Other things that we try to do is anything that is unique, where we're the only ones who can do it. So in this case, working on climate research with FAMU, that section got bolded. That was something that was not, we felt was a thing that we wanted to call attention to. Along that same idea of not overwhelming reviewers, present your ideas as simply as possible. This is not the place to break out the dictionary, the thesaurus. Wow. You don't want to use your big GRE words here, because the more complex language you use just obscures meaning in this case. It's pretty well documented in the sales literature that the more simply an idea is presented, the more understandable it is, and then the more credible it is. So some of the examples of how I see this play out a lot. Big words like elucidate. That's one of my favorites. I see that one all the time. People even argue with me about it. You don't need to say words like that. Just say this project is going to do X, Y, and Z. It will look at, it will explore, it will no, look at and explore. Those are usually the ones I see. This next one here, this is an example from one that was really one of my favorites. This activity allows students to experience visual impressions of a working lab. Experience visual impressions of a working lab. What does that mean? They're going to look at it. They're going to go inside and look at a lab. You know, I almost want to say this is the office meme of Kevin, you know, why use lot word when few word do? Not quite that much, but yeah, you don't want to put unnecessary language in here really for no reason. Another one that I see a lot, people saying more specifically. You don't need to be more specific, just be specific in the first place, and you don't have to, you can avoid that entire sentence. Very similar, we want to avoid grandiose language. So really over the top saying how great we are or how important something is. And it's just this massive, massive thing because this is subjective. All right, so what's important to you may not necessarily be important to the reviewer. Instead, what we want is to be as specific as we possibly can about the expected outcomes. So avoid saying things like, you know, your project is going to revolutionize your field. You would better have a lot of evidence and a lot of preliminary data to suggest that you actually are going to revolutionize something. Same thing with saying things like a total paradigm shift, right? That requires a lot of justification to back that up. You know, another one is saying things like this single research project here is going to solve climate change or end world hunger. Those are massive problems that no one project could ever be expected to solve by itself. And then similar to that is anything that would give the impression that you're going to, the activities that you're suggesting to do with a, say, $100,000 grant will do the following tasks, and then you name tasks that would require $1 million to do instead. So make sure that what you're saying in your proposal is as specific as you possibly can be about what you're doing and what you expect to happen from it. And don't rely on just saying how great things are. So some examples here of how to be specific in proposal contexts. On the left here, we have some bad examples, and then on the right, we have how to make them better. So for example, you know, based on this prior research, the next step is obvious to you. I mean, maybe it's obvious to you, but to a reviewer, not necessarily. And so they may misinterpret what you mean. They may make an assumption about what the next step is that is totally wrong. Instead, what you would want to do is based on the prior research, the next step is state the next step. Once process A has been completed, we will then begin work on process C. You know, there you're inferring that you're going to do process B, but the reviewer may not necessarily follow that logic, and you may end up with a criticism because of it. So again, you know, it's relatively simple to fix. Just say you'll do process B. Be really deliberate and really specific about everything that you say. We'll get a little bit more into how to use graphics and captions on the next slide. But for example, the results of process A are shown in table 1. What are those results? Don't just leave it up to the reviewer to interpret data themselves in a proposal or interpret any kind of, you know, anything that you put in there. It could be, you know, you could be putting a image of a painting that you want to critique. and say, this is it. We'll tell them a little bit about it. Tell them what you want to take away from that graphic. We expect our work to yield important results. Okay, what are those important results? Specify. And then this last one here is one of my favorites. We will work with our partners to complete the project. The phrase work with doesn't mean anything at all until you specify it, until you define what it means. So again, in this case, just be really specific, almost over the top. We're going to do A, they're going to do B, and just really, really say in as much detail as you can fit into the page what you're going to do. So I mentioned graphics a moment ago. This is one that I started hearing early and often in my grant writing career. You got to use graphics, you got to use images, you got to put pictures and such in a proposal. You just have to do it. It's one of those almost cliches of grant writing, and not necessarily. You want to use graphics appropriately. It is a good idea. The old phrase of a picture is worth 1,000 words is absolutely true, but you need to use the right kind of graphic to convey the right information. So the list here gives a couple of examples of when to use certain things, like when to use a chart, graph, photo, illustration, etc. Because you don't want to use the wrong thing in the wrong place. The key to graphics is that they draw in the reader's attention and then increase their understanding and retention of the content that you're associating with that graphic. You can use them to tell a story, but really the main thing is that's the first thing somebody sees when they look at that page. And so you can guarantee that they're going to see whatever it is on the graphic or in the caption of that graphic. Captions being incredibly important. And we want to use captions, not labels. The difference being labels simply say, this is what this is. In this case, this is the proposed procedure. Well, we could make that better by saying, this is the proposed procedure, and here's why that's important. Making the connection between the feature, which is this procedure, and the benefit, which in this case was stronger yet lighter structural components for use in advanced aeronautical applications. Right, so we're saying not only what is it, but why it's important. And when we pair that with the fact that the graphic is likely the first thing that a reviewer is going to see on the page, we can be sure, or at least confident, that they're going to see that theme statement that we're associating with it. This is especially important for things like graphs or any kind of data or tables that you may want to put up here, because again, you don't want to leave it up to the reviewer to interpret that information on their own. At the same time, we don't want to use graphics inappropriately. We don't want to use graphics just for the sake of using graphics. For example, a picture of an umbrella and some beach chairs on the Gulf of Mexico really is not valuable in a proposal talking about the effects of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill on the Gulf of Mexico. Similar to that, we don't necessarily need to be putting photographs of fighter jets in a proposal about making better materials for those aircraft. If you're writing a proposal to the Air Force, let's say, the Air Force is going to know what their jets look like. They don't need to, you don't need to waste your precious page space on unnecessary graphics just because you feel that you need to put graphics in. So structure then. This is tying back to that idea of creating a checklist followed by an outline. Now this is how we're going to apply it into the actual proposal. The first most important thing about proposal structure is have one. Make sure your proposal has a structure and is not just a stream of consciousness thoughts. And emphasize what is going to happen in the future, not what has already been done. A lot of times in journal articles in particular, and in academic writing, we tend to spend a lot of time really laying out all that has been done before adding what our contribution is to that pre-existing knowledge. In this case, we want to do the opposite. We want to start off by saying what it is that we're going to do, why that's important, and then lay out the case of everything that has happened ahead of time. People tend to remember best the first thing they read and the last thing they read. So if your, the thing that you are doing with your proposal isn't the first thing in that proposal, you significantly reduce the chances that the reviewer is actually going to remember what it is you're doing. One of the last things I want to talk about now is how to write specifically to review criteria. So like I was saying, when I'm talking about the checklist, going through and making that list of all the various different things that reviewers need to see that the RFP requires, or that the agency's review criteria ask for. You can then craft sentences and craft sections within the proposal that specifically address those requirements and make it easier on the reviewer to just, identify that section of your proposal, copy it and paste it into their review, and just make their lives easier, thus making them, feel better about your proposal. For those of you who don't know, reviewers on grants typically are given very specific instructions about what to look for. They have to fill out, in a lot of cases, a form that asks them to evaluate the proposal based on intellectual merit or broader impacts or whatever the case may be, significance or something along those lines. And so if you understand what it is they're asking for, you can, make it easy for the reviewer to find that section and put it into their review. So this is an example from FSU's internal funding program, the First Year Assistant Professor Award, using their review criteria, which is project issue and goals, research methods and activities. On the next slide is broader impacts. And then on the final slide is differentiation from dissertation research. And so if the review criteria is the project or issue that the goal, or the project or issue that the project will address important in the PI's area of research, what you could do in your proposal is say, this topic is important in my area of research because, right? And then that you could be really sure that the reviewer will see that sentence and just be able to answer the questions that they have to answer to evaluate your proposal. Are the research methods and creative activities appropriate in light of the goals and objectives of the project? Say things like the proposed methodology was selected because. Be really deliberate about how you phrase things in order to make it easy on them. Let's see. Is the project clearly related to the PI's long-term research goals? Again, I mean, it's almost obvious here, but the PI's long-term research goals are just be, tie it back. There's nothing that says that you can't even copy and paste language from the RFP itself and put it into your proposal to address those requirements. This next one does trip people up sometimes about how is the proposed work different from something else that has been done before. Especially if you're building onto prior work, it's really important to say prior work did whatever. Now this new thing is different, because otherwise people will ask, why are we funding this? Why would we give more money to do something that has already been done? So if you haven't made your case that you are different, that you are innovative, you're not going to be funded. Budgets. This is tricky to do, but easy to, if you're going to get in trouble on a proposal, this is where you'll get in trouble. Asking for more than you need or asking for less than you need. Both of them will get you in trouble. The people who review these proposals have done this work themselves. Typically, you have to have been a funded investigator or a funded project lead yourself before you get asked to be on a review panel. And so if you've done the work before, you know how much it costs. And so if a proposal comes in that has extra expenses, you'll know it and you can call it out. Likewise, if it doesn't have enough in there, the reviewers will also see it and call you out on that, because they'll ask, do you have enough resources here to be able to do the things that you're proposing to do? Make sure to budget for all of your tasks, or explain why you don't need to budget for them. If you're going to utilize resources that are already existing, say so. One of the biggest killers of projects is reviewers thinking that the idea is great, but that you couldn't possibly do it because there's not enough money or enough resources here to be able to do so. When sponsors give money to grantees, they are essentially making an investment. And they are taking on risk that your project will not succeed. And the budget is one of the places where you can really help reduce that risk and provide the agency with confidence that you're going to be able to complete your project. The last thing I want to mention too is that every proposal requires supporting documents to go along with the written narrative section. Things like bio sketches or CVs, letters of support and recommendation, any kind of equipment or facilities descriptions, data management plans. All these various documents will take a lot longer than you think to collect and to format. And you don't want to be here at the 11th hour before you need to submit a proposal, just finding out that you needed the letter of support from a partner that you now can't contact for several days. So build all of those into your checklist and into your schedule, and make sure that you're working on them in parallel to writing the actual narrative document itself. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.